I have the pleasure of running the last panel today. I would like to ask a quick question, actually on behalf of the entire panel. Who has AI fatigue? Okay, so what we thought we'd do is end the day on AI. To help me do that, I would like to introduce John from Pet Circle and Maria from Unilever. Why don't we do a little bit of a round of introductions, maybe your name, where you're from, and a little bit about where you've been in your career, if that's okay. John, we'll start with you.
Sure, just testing, okay. Hi, I'm John. I'm the Chief Growth and Marketing Officer at Pet Circle. I've been in digital marketing for longer than I care to admit, but for the last 5 years I've been working at Pet Circle. We're probably the largest e-com player that you've never heard of. I think we're the third largest by revenue. We service almost 1 million customers annually. And what we're really trying to do is we're trying to create an experience where we can map the right product to every kind of pet, species, breed, need. And so we're really trying to map the customer to the infinite amount of choice that exists out there. And of course, because we're an onliner, I can carry a lot more range than perhaps the brick and mortar competitors. Actually the reason I ended up in digital is because 20 years ago I figured this thing called Google and the internet was going to have a profound impact on marketing. I think AI is going to have even more of an effect. I think you can take AI, mobile, and every other major societal event in the last 30 years, and AI is going to have that kind of impact. And maybe leave you with, before in this intro, I think you've got to have two mindsets when you're thinking about AI. First is you've got to flip the narrative. So this is not the end of creativity, it's the start of infinite more creative possibilities. Now, this is not the end of my teams, it's actually how you're going to actually enable them and empower them to do more. So I think you've got to really have a mindset that changes. This is going to enable a ton of stuff. And then, I think the other sort of key thing is you've got to start simple. Like it's really complex. So get out there and do, I think one of the points made is you've got to keep things simple because it's all about execution. So, and then I think actually I will add a third one, is you've got to go educate yourself. There's a lot of information, a lot of misinformation. I'm going back to school. I'm trying to learn as much about AI as I possibly can because it's complex. It's difficult to know where to start. So go out there and there's plenty of information. Go and find out as much as you possibly can.
Thanks, John. Maria, can we hear from you?
Hard to come out of I'm after this big introduction, but I'll do my best. I'm Maria. I lead the digital marketing and data team for Unilever. I also lead the AI acceleration team for our ANZ business. I am not from Australia, I'm from Argentina. So I came to this country 4 years ago with my company, with Unilever, and I've been working at Unilever for the past 5 years here and in Latin America. And I developed my career across marketing, digital marketing, data, a bit of sales, and now dipping my toes into the retail media space and also the innovation across AI. I agree with John. I feel like we are living in this amazing era to increase our digital literacy, our AI literacy. So I'm really excited on everything that is happening and on how we can use AI to do good things, to keep on doing good business, and to keep on delivering on sustainable growth for our market.
And I think the first thing to acknowledge is that AI is not new. Silvana started today by acknowledging actually SAP Emarsys has had AI in the platform since 2012. What I think a lot of us are really thinking about now is generative AI, which is really the next iteration. And I'm going to steal Jane from Oraton's term, which I loved, about being the author of the next chapter, right? And John, as you just said, removing the ego and really thinking and being very intentional about what it means for your business and actually learning about the capability and the posture is super important. So my first real question is, how is your business approaching AI, top down, bottom up? How are you thinking about it and the approaches that you're putting in place?
So I'll acknowledge the first question. I think it's got to be top down. We tried initially trying to seed AI projects into the teams. And through many reasons, we could not get traction. I mean, there's the mindset one. If by adopting my AI, I'm going to have a smaller team. There's a complexity piece. There's so much information, and then they've got a day job. And so what we've done is we've made it top down. we've got measures. We have a P1 system. It's one of my P1s. So I've actually got metrics and goals to get to drive AI into my areas. So I think that's one critical piece. I think the other piece is data. There's a lot of, you've got to get your data right. That's where you've got to spend a lot of time. In my business, we think about 3 tranches of data. And we have this debate: who's our customer? Is it the person who buys the pet food and the pet stuff, or is it the pet? Actually, we think it's the pet. So the most critical pieces of data are 3 things I need to know. I really need to know 2 things, plus one that's nice. I need to know the breed, I need to know how old it is, and ideally I'd like to know their name so that we can start talking to them personally. With those 3 things, I can make great recommendations. I can allow our customers to make great choices. The next piece is your product information data. We're going through this really laborious task now of retagging everything so that we can then, eventually we can map these 2 things together, right? So if I know you've got a Labrador, we know that they have joint issues. We also know that glucosamine is really good for joint issues, so I can then recommend food that has it if I've done my tagging and my structures correctly. So I can't impress. I would actually, before you start getting into generative AI and all this stuff, get your data right. Think about how you're going to use it and get it right. And then the least important piece of data is actually the person buying stuff. But we need to know who they are. We need to know, where they are, the demographics and all that stuff. But for me, the map of the pet with the product is really, really critical.
Marie, huge organisation globally. I'm sure there's not a consumer that you haven't, touched in terms of the product reach. How are you thinking about AI and the approach and the structure that you're thinking in the business?
So in Unilever globally, there's so much AI going on. We have a lot of fatigue for sure. There are over 500 initiatives running on AI across a multiplicity of the disciplines that we touch on. The approach is basically twofold. We have sort of a deep approach in innovation, so everything that AI can facilitate to provide a competitive advantage. So projects that are more IP protected, that are changing the way that we operate within our business. And then we have sort of a more broad implementation that it's what are the actual tools that everyone can use and we can sort of make available, train our teams, generate information towards that, but with a very high ethical mindset on how we use AI and what is the data that we put in place. So, of course, putting our data together and making everything accessible, organized, taxonomies and all of that, it's in place. So that's sort of evergreen, brilliant basics. We go very strict on how we sort of create and name our data sets, and then there is different approach around specific implementations of tools. So basic use of tools for productivity, for marketing, for day-to-day implementation, and then there is a massive work on innovation. And I think that in our case it's both top-down and bottom-up. There is we have a page where we can sort of pitch for budgets and ideas and new initiatives that we might want to use, and then there is a massive top-down from our global CEO on embracing AI for productivity basis. So we are in quite this nice moment where everyone is sort of getting excited, and the people that is a bit afraid is getting trained to sort of prevent that space.
I think it's okay to be afraid.
Yeah.
And it's okay to normalize that. Getting to another level of practicality, then you said starting to implement some specific things. So in the lens of, because AI can mean a lot of different things, so worker productivity versus actual marketing. So in the context of today, what are some of the actual use cases and things that you're implementing now and the areas of focus?
Yeah, so for me, everything that is happening on the digital commerce space is super important. How do we make sure that our omnichannel assets are created well? That's something that used to be very expensive and very complex for a company that has thousands of SKUs in market. Now we are using a lot of tools and AI to Gen AI on images to ensure that we have sort of that omni-channel coverage perfectly done. We have a lot on productivity. Of course, I feel like everyone is using Copilot, we are using Copilot on our day-to-day basis to do things that used to take me hours because I'm not from here and I'm hesitate on my language a lot. Now Copilot helped me to do it better. And then we are working a lot on specifics of our campaign. So we have a very strong commitment to sort of expand the AI literacy into our consumers. So for example, with Dove, we just did a campaign that had a playbook to do better prompting, so real beauty prompting. That is a tool that we are sharing in general, trying to educate everyone. It's in there to avoid AI being biased or a stereotype or preventing that universe. So yeah, lots going on. From a marketing perspective, lots going on.
John, same question. What are some of the sort of practical use cases or areas of focus that you're looking at?
Yeah, the way that in our top-down framework, we sort of split out the applications into 5 areas. So it's content, customer service, productivity, personalization, and then analytics. So we've got owners for each of those areas. So to break down what we're doing, customer service. This is actually an example of keeping things simple. We're going to just focus on the use case of where's my order. When we get it wrong, it really customers like unbelievable. We participate in this unconditional bond between pet and pet parent. It's great, but when you get it wrong, they let you know about it. So we instead of taking the whole of CS and going, how do you push that all through AI, we're going to take that use case. What I do, I was speaking to a colleague in an online business. They're at 60% now of all of their customer services on AI, and they're getting better NPS, better stickiness, like better revenue, every metric you can possibly think. Everything is better. And we often think about ourselves, we want to create the experience, that niche little pet store. When you go in with your pet, the store owner knows exactly what you need. They know exactly, they're really tactile with what you do. We want to really try and recreate that experience. But you think about our CS agents, we train them constantly. In fact, I think we're up to now 5 hours a month, which is apparently quite a lot of training. But it all gets lost. They go, they lose. But in an AI model, it's retained. It's retained and improved. So, huge applications, I think, there. Content, I've got a goal to get 50% of our content out is AI generative. So, of course, product reviews, images, the whole gamut. But loads of applications there, I think. Personalization is actually there. I get really excited. I think we've talked about personalization as an industry for 20 years, like the mobile. Talked about it forever and ever until when the iPhone came and it happened. I think AI is going to be personalization at scale. That really gets me excited. I think there are applications there that are just going to blow people away. What's interesting is we talked about the issue of it not being human. I think AI is actually going to do the opposite. I think it's going to create really human interactions, really personal interactions. At the moment, I'm still batch blasting a whole bunch of stuff out to people. I'm going to be able to do stuff maybe where I've got your image of your pet is actually laced through your email, with very specific personal recommendations of products and needs for that specific breed and age of pet. So I'm really excited about that particular use case. Productivity loads, but I think actually with productivity we're finding start small. Like we got note taker in Google now. Every meeting has to have note taking through Google. Great, because you're allowing people to just start using the product. Or sort of seeing the value of AI. So I think that's important in analytics. We're starting to experiment with LLM sort of analytics. So, what were our sales and margin last week, or what, et cetera, et cetera. So like that kind, you've all sat there and tried to work your way through 100 different Tableau boards, or in our case, Looker. I think that's very quickly going to be, very specific LLM queries, and you're going to get the data straight back.
Just out of curiosity then, so you have a KPI to have 50% of images that would be Gen AI, or generated by AI, sorry. What timeline is that? Like I'm so curious that you've actually got some hard metrics on this.
June next year.
June next year,
yeah.
All right.
We're at about, most of our product reviews now go through AI. Most of our vet content, what happens is our vets write content and push it through generative AI. So we're about 10-15% now. But I think we'll get to, I'm pretty confident we'll get to 50.
I'm someone who absolutely has an unconditional bond with their dog.
Yeah.
His name is Jet. He's a mini schnauzer. He's a couple of K that way. How you can't have the name of my dog and the image of my dog without my consent and my permission. So AI and the large language models that we look at is only so good as the data that we're inputting. So what is your approach to zero-party, first-party data? How are you capturing that, and how are you leveraging Emarsys to do that?
Fortunately, people love talking about their pets. So
Guilty.
Yeah, so we haven't even started, and we're at 45% of customers are happy giving us that information. We've done a couple of tests. Like, it's going to cost me maybe $5 coupon to get to 100 really quickly with an image. I mean, honestly, I think it's so important. I think that the mapping of that with the PIM data, the product information data, will be our competitive moat. So if it costs me more, I'll do it. Because that to me, everything else is commoditized. Your web infrastructure, your delivery networks, all that stuff, it's ultimately commoditized. The marriage of those two pieces, and if you get it right, where I can make that almost like that local pet store recommendation, is going to be our competitive moat. And for me, and that will be personalization at scale.
And Maria said a similar question. I mean, we heard from Lisa Ronson earlier today. She used to be head of Coles. I walk into a Coles and buy a Unilever product. I don't buy it from you. So how do you get data on your customer, and how are you then feeding that into these models?
Yeah, multiple touch points, I would say. In the retail space, data collaboration is something that we work quite a lot at scale. Data collaboration with partners like Coles 360, like Everyday Rewards, on that sort of retail media space. That's something that we are developing. But yeah, of course, we don't have such a rich data like sets as a direct-to-consumer business. And we've been testing with images on our retailer partners. Not as advanced as you were saying, but and we've seen some rejection when you see a human that is not actually a human and it's generated through AI. So that's an interesting space that we are tapping into. So for example, we don't use hands that are not human hands. We just use AI to generate backgrounds, to do some specific things on products, but not leverage to everything and to everyone just yet, because we are seeing a bit of backlash from our consumers.
And we talked earlier about the sort of touch point, right? Where does AI end and the human touch remain? And my story from this is that we heard recently from a zero beer company. They were trying to understand how they promote zero beer in pubs, right? Because it turns out when they spent time in the bars and asked bartenders, what are people asking for when they're not drinking, when they're designated driver, it's just, give me a water, it's fine. So their campaign was say no to water, because that's actually who they're competing with, not other products and other drinks. But you don't really get that insight without spending time in the pubs. The data may not have surfaced that, right? So where's the break point, John, between the AI and trusting the data and getting the scale that we need to be a successful business versus that human impact?
I mean, there's a great Bezos quote that says, you don't trust the data, look at the anecdotes. And so we spend a lot of time looking at CS interactions, for example, with customers. So very qualitative sort of data packets, if you like. Honestly, I mean, I've drunk the Kool-Aid a little bit. I actually think that, as I said, I think we'll be able to do a better job of that in-store local pet store than they will, very quickly. I think that if you've got a pet tray, for example, what's your pet's name?
Jed.
Okay, Jed. Let's talk about Jed. What kind of breed is Jed?
He's a black mini schnauzer.
See how easy it is to get the pet information?
No. What other zero-party data do you want, John?
I'm actually jealous. Like, it's so easy.
Unfortunately, I don't know enough about schnauzers, but anyway. But my point being is, let's just say joint issues are a problem, right? And glucose staining is really important, and your food doesn't have that. You're probably buying a really expensive premium diet, I suspect. So we will be able to say, hey, actually, Jed would benefit more from product B with glucosamine. For me, that's a really very personal insight that brings real value to you as a pet parent. I actually think if you do this right, this will be tactile and human in its delivery. I mean, in fact, I'll rephrase that. It needs to be tactile and human in its delivery. So you need to find that way that you're not, gosh, they just kind of made this stuff up and it's just all automated, and they're just, it needs to feel like it really is personal, really is about you and Jed.
And I think also the fail, like it's unlikely to fail. Like if I go into a local pet store, to give you an example, and it's someone who I don't usually, shop from, and he doesn't know that pet and the needs, then there's a breakpoint, right? So the data helps you kind of not fail that when I'm trying to buy a product that's not relevant for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you think about a store, like say, a big box store, is they train their agents really, really thoroughly, but it breaks all the time, right? Like maybe you haven't had that training unit. So you're never going to get that kind of vast amounts of knowledge all stored into a singular interaction that you can through sort of an AI-delivered solution.
Similar, Maria, like where are you seeing the break point? Where does the sort of creativity come in? Some of your products are fairly personal to people's needs, and so I'm sure there's also a high empathy radar on that. How are you guys thinking about this?
Yes, the way that we think it's AI allow us to, the volume, allow us to produce creatives at scale, allow us to deploy sort of better digital marketing campaigns that might have thousands of assets that we need to deploy. So AI provides that sort of easiness and mass production, adaptation of assets, creating copy, doing all of that. But the role of the marketers, in my opinion, more than ever, is to be really switch on with culture. So we are adopting this approach of cultural first. So that's the role that we need to take as humans, direct AI to do things that can do great, but taking the insights, understanding culture, looking into trends, putting our brand in the front of society, running our brands in the way that we want to run. That's probably the most important thing that my teams are doing at the moment, immersing themselves in culture, because all of the rest, we have data, we have amazing tools that can facilitate, we have a suite of things that we can do, but actually building what our brands means, what are the roles in our consumers' life, that is not something that AI can do, at least in the short term.
And I also think you rely on vendors' capability, right? So how are we showing up to the party and producing a roadmap that allows you to be more bleeding edge in what you're doing? There's obviously multiple products in the market that are available, but you want to double down on your existing partnerships as well to get there. I want to get some inspiration around impacts and results. So Maria, where are you seeing, or what can you share that has really moved the needle in actually executing some of these campaigns using AI?
Yeah, I think that we live across a multiplicity of categories. We have very good results on our shelf execution, for example, when we use AI. But my favorite one, it's what we did with Dove recently. We launched, it's the 20th anniversary of the Dove selfie, the self-esteem campaign. And this year we went really strong on what AI is actually doing on new generations and how they are sort of interacting with that. It's really aligned with our sort of Unilever view of the world of sustainable growth and leaving the planet better than we actually did. And we launched a toolkit for parents and for consumers. It's available on our website that educates people, that educates the general public to be more less biased, more diverse on the way that they prompt when they are prompting AI tools. And that was something that when that was presented to me as a marketer, I was no one is going to understand this. This is way too complex. Who is doing this at Midjourney or in ChatGPT? Who is actually doing this? But we decided to launch it anyways. And I was extremely surprised on the amount of parents, schools, consumers in general that downloaded that playbook to be less an stereotype when generating AI images. So that's probably what I think. I think that when we do well, when we think forward, when we think progressively, we see interaction and we see good feedback on that. So that's something that's an initiative that really makes me proud from Unilever.
That's excellent. And John, you're an Emarsys customer. You're using some of our features. So
all right, this is the plug, is it? No, it's a genuine use case. So we're using the omnichannel personalization tool. We're still starting small, and we've obviously got the name, but we also added now the image of the breed, and we're testing that doubles the revenue percent. And again, we're scratching the surface on that. It could eventually be Jed, for example. with very specific recommendations. So just through changing the imagery to map to the breed of the customer, like doubled the revenue percent. So like, and I as I said, I think that scratches the surface of possibility. So excited to see. For me, then the challenge is how do you take that, because you still got to sort of curate the email. How do you create that and generate it to 66 breeds, and so on. But I believe it will be possible. I feel that I actually think in the personalisation space, the notion of a campaign will go, and you'll have segments on one side, objectives on the other, and then a machine sitting in the middle that will determine things like the images, the coupon, or the offer, the channel. Like I think channels will go as a concept. I think it'll determine whether it should be, Facebook, text, push, email, whatever. So I think, and that's scary for some people because my team spend most of their time building campaigns. But imagine if, then I go, okay, imagine this. Imagine if they thought about the customer segment and the outcomes and optimised to that. That's going to make them way more effective than sitting there building campaigns. It's like painting the Harbour Bridge. We start at the start of the week, finish the end of the week, start again. And they don't really think about the customer. They don't really think about the results as such. So for me, this area gets me super excited.
I think that the name of this global festival that Emarsys puts on is Power to the Marketer, and it's very intentional. We did an IDC report a year ago looking at customers that use the platform, and it freed up 35% of marketers' time that used the platform, and also 53% quicker to get campaigns out, right? So that's pretty basic AI doing a lot of the heavy lifting that marketing teams do spend a lot of time on. And I think you just mentioned impact, right? Revenue, and I know Logan from 99 Bikes is somewhere here in the room. We just launched a case study with him last week. In the first 90 days of using the platform, they have seen an 8% increase in revenue, right? So I think AI and the topic that we have just discussed today is important, but it also has to have an impact, either on your people, your profit, or really the customer experience, which then contributes to both of those things.